if I could take you back to the 115, your assignment as a medical technician, a technical sergeant in the 115th Medical Battalion, can you explain what the mission of the 115 was, what its complement of personnel was, and then how it was arrayed on the battlefield?
The 40th Infantry Division was a California National Guard division. And attached to the infantry division were several other specialty units, like there was a tank battalion, and there was an artillery battalion, there were transportation battalions, and there was a medical battalion. The 115th Medical Battalion was made up of a headquarters company, 3 ambulance companies, and a clearing company. And a clearing company would be a outfit closer to the front line than a MASH hospital would be. There were no female nurses there. They were all male technicians. The wounded and ill would come to us from a battalion aid station, usually by ambulance, sometimes just by litter, by stretcher, and we would triage them and take them through. We usually were divided into 2 platoons. So there were probably 200, a little over 200 plus in a company. And in a platoon, our unit was this over 100 people. And we had 4 physicians and a dentist. And the dentist served as an anesthesiologist. There was very little dentistry done, unless there were jaw wounds and things of that type. The psychiatrist was also with us, and of course during that time, most of the time, he worked as an anesthesiologist. So that, anyway, we generally kept four operating rooms busy. I was placed into many different capacities, first on a ward, post-op ward, then into triage, and then I was placed into sterilization. And we had to sterilize by autoclave all the instruments and the drapes and the gowns and the masks and all that stuff. So I was responsible for that. Eventually, I became the #1 non-com in charge of the surgeries, which carried a rank of a T3, which is 3 stripes, a rocker with a T in the center. It was a pay grade of a staff sergeant at that time. I don't know how the ranks are today. Before we made our first invasion, they all issued us a bulletproof vest, and this is our bulletproof vest. It shows my picture, my name, my serial number, and the War Department in the back. It's got a red cross and my thumbprints. The idea was that as a prisoner of war or anything, I should have special treatment. So we carried this in our billfold, and we all just kind of facetiously called it our bulletproof vest. Truth of the matter is, those medics that were attached to an infantry battalion or squad were at more risk than the infantrymen. I remember one time on my ward, a ward was usually up to 20 beds. I had 1 wounded infantryman and I had 5 wounded medics. All the medics were wounded more seriously than were the infantrymen. I was spared being sent to the front because they had a rule that no medic could go up later in the war under the age of 20, and I was 2 months away from being 20, and that's the only reason I was not sent further forward.
Now, the field medics that you referred to and the extent of injuries to them, did they wear the Red Cross band on their?
No, there's no insignia, and they could carry arms. The arms that they were given mostly were carbines. First off, they were 45s. Early in the war, it was 45s they had strapped. Then they were given carbines. I elected not to carry a weapon. I said I could do one of 2 things. protect myself or heal somebody else. I can't do both. So, but by and large, most of the medics abandoned their carbines. When the first wounded, they would come up, had an M1, and they would give the wounded man the carbine and take the M1. Then some wounded fellow would come along that had a BAR, and so they'd put the, but pretty soon medics were carrying BARs and Thompson submachine guns. Well, they're practically worthless as medics, you know, encumbered with all this weaponry. It seems to make them feel safer, but it really didn't. It was just a kind of a pacifier for them, you know, because most of them couldn't break down a Thompson submachine gun and put it back together. The thing jammed. I mean, they might as well have a teaspoon, you know, and would be better off.
And so the removal of the Red Cross band from the arm was because they became targets?
They became targets. Now, I don't think that was true in the European theater.
If I could ask you to go back to Luzon one more time, please,
okay.
And recall a scenario that involved, again, your major burns,
okay,
and a shower.
Okay. Well, our company D was the clearing company, and we were divided into 2 platoons. And the infantry was advancing all the time, and our idea is being as close to the front line as possible. And so we would leapfrog each other. So when we got, we could not, we'd take care of our wounded and injured and ship them back to a field hospital or a hospital ship. Mm-hmm. When our patient census was down to 0, we'd collapse our unit, put them in a truck, and move forward to the front lines. We would then set up for wounded, and as we usually set up into a convent or a school is where we'd usually take over for our unit. We got there was no shower facilities or anything, and our showers were a 50-gallon drum, a gasoline drum with a hole in the side. Another, where the bing was, they had a little piece of pipe coming out and a faucet here, number 10 can hanging over that with holes in it, and you turn that on, and that was your shower. So I was assigned to set up the shower. I get the shower all set up and filled with water, and I'm hot and sweaty and all. I said, well, I might as well try it out, see how it works. So I get undressed, and in order to save water, I get wet enough to suds myself up, and then while I'm all sudsed up, then I'm going to turn the spigot on to rinse off. I'm totally sudsed, you know. When Major Burns shows up, he says, "Soldier, what are you doing in here?" I said, "I'm taking a shower." "I can see that, but why are you in this shower?" He said, "This is the officer's shower." I said, "I was not told that, sir. I understood it was the enlisted man's shower." "Well, it's the officer's shower, and I'll get out." I said, "It'll just take me 30 seconds to rinse off." He said, "Out, out, out, out." Well, out meant out, just outside. I mean, outside of the shower area, the soldiers were bartering with the women for one thing or another, as you can imagine what the range might have been. Here I am totally naked, and all I have is my helmet, and there's a small pump there. I'm saying to the guys, "Hey, help me pump my helmet full of water so I can dump it over in the spray." No, they all stood, you know. Well, I'm 6 foot tall, but that's the only part of me that was of any impressive size. So there I was naked, trying to get rinsed off and dried off and cleaned, and everybody's standing around giving the hee-haw. So it didn't endear me at all to the major, of course. But I decided to make the best of a bad situation.
Yeah. Now, you were telling us about your landing at on where one of the fellow soldiers, a Nisei soldier, got injured,
Oh.
and you mentioned that you were going to meet him again. Did you
Oh,
not
oh
run
yeah,
into him again?
this little Japanese boy. This was on Luzon. I had a ward at that time, and for some reason or other, I needed to leave my patients and go get to the pharmacy to get some more bandages or medicines or whatever. So I walk up to where the supply tent or the pharmacy area was to get my supplies. Coming back, I passed the shower, and the shower is a bamboo curtain with this barrel on the top. And there are 2 or 3 guys from the motor pool on either side with M1s or bigger. I think one guy had a VAR, and they're all standing and said, "What in the world's going on here?" There's a Jap in there. I said, "Oh." I said, "But there's the uniform hanging on the nail outside is American uniform." I said, "We have Japs in our army. There are interpreters and all." He said, "Well, he's a Jap." I said, "Well, look at the guy." I said, "He doesn't weigh more than 100 pounds. I only weighed 147 or 100. What does it say on here? Give my weight. At the time, I think 143 pounds at that time. I said, "I'll go in and find out who he is. And if he attacks me, he's going to attack me with his bare hands. You guys can pull him off me, all you guys. So I'll find out." So I walk in. I said, "Hi, what you doing here?" He said, "Well," he said, one of our soldiers came down with the flu or diarrhea or some medical problem, wasn't wounded." He says, "And my platoon commander, lieutenant, sent me down here with the Jeep with him for sick call. While I'm waiting to find out if they're going to keep him or send him back, I saw the shower, and I've been sleeping in a foxhole for 2 weeks without a shower, and I thought I'd take time. And so I looked up, and he had a little triangular scar." I said, "How'd you get that scar?" He said, "Well, I was on a LCI going from New Guinea to New Britain, and a case fell on me." I says, "Bingo, I meet the guy that put the bandage on you." So I met this guy again, maybe 2 months later, and it was all healed up, of course, but it left a little tiny white triangular scar on his forehead.
Well, you've already described your units and your personal experiences on Panay, and then Negros Occidental was next for your battalion.
Yeah,
that was some heavy resistance met by the unit, wasn't it?
well, we did, but these islands are mountainous, volcanic, but there, of course, if there's mountains, there's valleys, and so the inhabited part of the island was in the valley, and they had a straight run down the valley, and every 5 to 8 miles, 10 miles, there'd be another town or a village. We went as far as the last major town, and after that, it was mahogany forests and jungle. And of course, we had secured Luzon to the north, and we had secured Leyte at the south, and so the Japanese had absolutely no way to resupply. So they were going to live on what they had and then starve to death. And so after we got them out of the major population area, we just set up a perimeter. We didn't go further into the woods than we had to. We said, sit there and starve to death. So it became quiet in this little town. We had all the towns had a town square, and one side is the Catholic Church, and the other side, opposite, is the convent and school. Well, we always took over the convent and school for our hospital. On this side is the municipal building for the county or area, and on this side is the mayor's home. Well, our hospital is over here, and the Headquarters company is over here in the other part of the convent. And the major, now things are quiet, it's like this. The major has been invited for lunch to the mayor's home. And the guy that ran the PBX for our company came down with hepatitis. And so they said, anybody know how to run the PBX? I said, no, I think I can learn. He said, yeah, I think you can. So they gave me 20 minutes on how to run the PBX. And all of a sudden I get a call from a major from division. He says, it's Colonel so-and-so. Now our colonel was a physician, but he thought he was General Patton. He had a Sam Brownie belt, across with a pearl-handled weapon on his side with leather booties, and what do you call the breeches that bloom out, and walked with a swagger. He was going to win the war by himself. Well, he said the captain, General Brush, was a World War I veteran of the artillery, and because he'd been in the artillery, he was hard of hearing. So he'd have his ears washed periodically, and I was always the one to assign his job of washing his ears. And he was a principal of high school between the two wars. So he treated me like a son. And he would hold a little dish, and I would gently wash his ears, and we'd have nice talk about home and what we're going to do with our lives and all that sort of thing. But anyway, the major is now calling, and he said, I'm the adjutant for General Brush. He urgently wants to talk to your colonel. I forget my colonel's name. He said, where is he? I said, he's not in, and I do not know where he is. And he said, okay, as soon as he's in, call the general. Yes, sir. 5, 6, 8 minutes later, the phone rings. Same adjutant. Where's the colonel? And I said, I have no idea. Finally, another 10 minutes, and the phone rings again. Soldier, do you have any idea in the world where that colonel might be? I said, no, sir, I don't. But I've been asking around, and the fellas all tell me he's shacking up with the mayor's daughter across the street. He said, soldier, you get over there and you get him on the phone. I said, Major, I'm not allowed to leave my post. He says, soldier, you have a direct order from General Brush to leave that post and get that colonel back on this phone as fast as you can. So I said, yes, sir. And I put the phone down, of course, and run across maybe 200, 300 feet, or maybe more than that. And knock on the door, and the lieutenant comes to the door, and I explain my mission. He says, get back to your phone, soldier. So I get back to the phone, and there I can see out the corner of my tent, or the little room I'm in, the window of the little room. I could see the door of the mayor's house, and I can see the colonel adjusting his collar and adjusting his belt and getting everything all set up and walking as fast as he can. Of course, I patched him through to the general. The next morning, around 8:30, the lieutenant comes. He said, have you been trained on the PBX? I said, no, sir. I said, the PBX operator is ill, and I have just been filling in. He said, well, we need to have a little practice. He said, I will say ding-a-ling, and then you act as you pick up, and what are you going to say? I says, 115th Medical Battalion, Company D, may I help you, sir? Fine. Let's try it again. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. And I said, 115th Medical Battalion, Company D, may I help you? Well, we did that 4 or 5 times. And he said, fine, I think you understand. He said, now you remember, the colonel is in or the colonel is not in. You understand that he's one of 2 places, in or out, nothing else. I said, I completely understand. About another 15, 20 minutes, the lieutenant's back, and he says, "We have found a accomplished PBX operator. What were your duties before this?" I said, "Well, I was in charge of triage." He says, "You report back there." That was the best.
Now, not all the injuries you treated were combat related.
No.
A lot of non-combat injuries.
Right.
And I believe that one of the injuries is directly related to the title of your book. I think this is a good time to introduce
Do the
your
best
book.
you can. So when we felt that Negros was secure, the 40th Infantry Division was going to be redeveloped, reconstituted back on the island of Panay. The two islands are something like between Los Angeles and Catalina Island. It's just a short. We went back and forth by landing craft. And so they relocated us back to our old quarters in the Iloilo Panay, which is the capital. Well, we had maybe 5 weeks of getting new replacements in, getting new equipment, getting refurbished. We were getting ready. They even had the ships in the bay and the harbor to load us up for the invasion of Japan. Okinawa was just about secure. And so we had a few people that were injured, automobile accidents, somebody falling out of a tree or whatever, but no wounded. And that. So they put me in charge of a prophylactic station downtown, in which in the pro station they had set up an ointment treatment that would prevent you from getting any kind of cooties or bugs. That would be wiped all over the genital area, and then they would inject into the urethral canal a dark brown iodine solution that was very mild, but that was to kill any kind of bacteria or bug of any sort. And they wanted to keep those syringes sterile, and so they stored them in 70% alcohol. And above each station, as they would go through each station, was in large letters exactly what they were supposed to do. But my job was to take each soldier that would come in for treatment and walk him through each stage so he'd do it exactly right. Well, apparently, some soldier, and I hadn't noticed, had put a syringe back in the alcohol without having taken all the brown iodine solution out of it, so the alcohol had turned a little brown. And so this first sergeant, and he had stripes, up, overseas, all of it. He had medals, and he was drunk as a lord, and big, big as an ox. And I said, "May I help you, Sergeant?" He shoved me aside, like I was a kid. And "Where's the entrance?" I mean, "Over there." So he goes in. It was all draped off with a cloth, so it was private. He's in there about 2 or 3 minutes. He starts swearing. He's just swearing up a stream. I said, "What seems to be the matter? Imagine, Sergeant." Now this iodine solution, which was very mild and didn't burn at all, was supposed to be held in the urethral canal before it was voided. That was his treatment. But he obviously had injected 70% alcohol, which would be 140 proof, into and so he said, "There's not a man alive that can hold this for 5 minutes." I said, "Well, just do the best you can, Sergeant."
Well, I think this is a good time to just show the camera your book. Now, you recently wrote your book, right?
Yes. Well, I have 3 children, 3 grandchildren, and now 3 great-grandchildren. But when the children, as they were younger, and the grandchildren also would come with horror stories of what happened that was unfair that day, I'd tell them one of my war stories, and we'd have a good laugh, and I said, you'll survive it, and life will go on. And so when I retired, I decided I'd write the stories off to the children. And I gave it to all of the children and to my brothers and sisters in the family. I just typed out the stories in a loose leaf notebook. And he said, you have to publish this, you have to publish this. Well, I just put it off and put it off. And finally I decided to publish, and I found a publisher, what do you call it, Amazon has a publishing company, and so the outlet of the book is through Amazon. You can purchase it for, I think it's $12.99 or $11.99. I can't remember, about around $12 for the book. But it's some of the stories I've told this afternoon are in there. And, I had the best story about my book is that I gave it to my daughter, and she has they have a friend who is a builder of upper class homes in the North Atlanta area. Most of his homes sell in $1 million, $1.25 million. And of course, with this recession, things were pretty bad. And so he kept his airplane, since he had he built most of the stuff out at Jones Creek and those kind of homes before he moved his business to Atlanta. So he kept his plane out up here at Daniel Field. So he spent the night with my daughter, and he was in the dumps. And she had just had this book for about 2 or 3 days. And so she was fixing dinner, and he was just grousing around. He said, shut up and read the book. And she said, you know, she's kind of joking. So he got the book, and she said, I had to wait dinner till he finished the book. She said he couldn't put it down. He had to read the whole thing.
Well, for one person who read that book, it's very interesting, and it certainly gives some insight into you and what makes you tick. And I must note that Dr. Zwemer has kindly dedicated that book to the archives. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Zwemer, now, what are your thoughts? What do you recall your thoughts to be at VJ Day?
Well, I had gotten through 3 assault landings. And VJ Day, everybody that had a weapon was shooting it in the air. So I got my cot in my little bunk was next to a curb, a concrete curb, about 10, 11 inches tall. During that time, I got down right next to that curb until the firing quieted down. I said, I'm not going to go through this war and end being wounded or killed because somebody is too drunk and too exuberant. But I believe that the dropping the atomic bombs saved my life, for sure. The other thing I'm sure of is that the war and the Army made a man out of me. And I came back out of the Army and was admitted to the first dental school. I was discharged in March and entered dental school in September. I worked in construction during the summer with my dad. And but I said, I believe that I became a better dental student, a better dentist, and a better man of having served in World War II. So I don't regret it at all. It really opened my eyes to what the world was like, and I think it made me more kind and generous about people. In particular, I remember probably one of my greatest hero in World War II was an Army captain. He was in a Jeep, and at that time the Jeeps were either had a mounted 30 millimeter machine gun, and some of them had 50. And so he had a Jeep driver, and they were ambushed. And his driver was killed. And he was wounded. The wound went right through his helmet and creased his forehead and went out the other side, but laid a flap down, and the blood is coming down. So he was essentially blinded, but he knew which direction that enemy fire was coming from, and he just turned that 50 caliber machine gun in that direction and emptied the tape, the belt of that, and then I got him in wounded, and we sewed him up, and I think we kept him 3 or 4 days, and he wanted to go back into action even with the sutures still in. He says, my aide man can take the sutures out. Well, he came back a few weeks, or time is probably a few days later, and he is running across the field, and he came in because he had diarrhea this time. That was what brought him in. But he showed me his pant legs. How the boots were. They had kind of blossomed or bloomered out here. The Japanese had what a rifle was, a 25 caliber rifle. He had a 25 caliber hole through this pant leg and through that pant leg, and he hadn't touched either one of his legs. But he was one of the nicest guys I ever ran into.
What date were you discharged from the Army? Let's go ahead and transition from the military back to your civilian life.
We went to Korea to disarm the Japanese, and we went down to Busan and then up to Taegu and operated a station hospital. And I had stomach ulcers. And on the train going back for deployment back to the States, to the High Point men, I vomited between train cars. And I didn't say anything about it. And my company commander, who was a very good friend of mine, called me in and says, Tom, the boys say that you vomited. He said, what in the world have you been eating? You don't drink. I said, just normal food. He said, has this happened before? I said, it's happened all my Army life. He said, well, he examined me. He said, I think you have an ulcer. And he said, we'll send you down to the station hospital and x-ray. And he x-rayed me, and I had an ulcer. He said, well, I got bad news. You were supposed to be shipped out to home tomorrow, but with ulcers, we're going to have to keep you in the hospitals for 30 days. I said, Captain, I fought this entire war with this ulcer. I think I can make it home on my own. He said, you've got a good point. And so he mixed up different concoctions. He said, now take this twice a day and this 4 times a day. And then when you report to the station hospital discharge, show them these x-rays and this medical history. And then the VA will check and see whether or not you're eligible for a medical discharge. So they still found the ulcer in the Army, and then they sent me over to the VA hospital, and they re-x-rayed me, and it was still there. And so I went through dental school on a disabled veterans rate, which gave me about 50% better pay than the GI Bill would have. But I am still on a 20% disability. And that's why I'm now under doctor's care at the moment.
Well, let's talk about your reunion back with the family. Would you like to share some of your experiences, memories?
Well, very obviously, my mother was greatly relieved, but she was, a very, very religious woman. And bless her soul. I came home, from an Army barracks in March, wearing wool clothing, Class A uniform, that just reeked of smoke. So we embraced, and she kissed me and thanked the Lord that I was home. And then the next thing she says, "Tom, you're not smoking, are you?" I said, "No, Mom." I said, "But 72 other men in the barracks are." Were. And so was the train. But we had a good laugh over that. From there, I hitchhiked to Massachusetts, where my dad was building some college buildings, and got a job with him. And I said, "Dad, I had been accepted, of course, to dental school, but of course, with all the boom of the VA housing and all, I said, why don't we go in the building business?" He said, "Great idea. The building business starts from the ground up. Here's a pick and shovel. We'll start building from the ground up." So I picked and shoveled from April or May until September, and decided, "Dad, I think I'm going to go back to dental school." He said, "Good idea."
Well, let's go ahead and talk about dental school. You went to dental school where?
I went to dental school at the University of Illinois. I think we only have time probably for one story. But
Yeah, let's go from the dental school, if you don't mind. Talk about why you've always wanted to be a dentist, and
well,
your tenure at Marquette, and then at
I was
Loma Linda.
I had buck teeth as a child, and so even during the Depression, my folks paid, I think, $400 to have my teeth straightened. And that, because of that, I said, I want to be a dentist. But I also, when I was a freshman in high school English, they asked me what I wanted for a career, and I said I wanted to teach biology. So eventually, when I finished dental school, I got an invitation to become a faculty member at Marquette University in Milwaukee, which is about 100 miles from Chicago. I taught there for 2 years, and went back and took orthodontics, and then went back and designed a new dental school for them at Marquette. And then Loma Linda started a dental school, and the dean of that dental school said, "We don't have a place for you. I already have an orthodontist. If you want to be a children's dentist, you can come and join." And I said, "Well, I love children's dentistry, but it's a young man's profession, and I have to look at a lifetime career. And I believe I can treat teenagers and young adults for a full lifetime, but I cannot treat young children for a lifetime." And so his orthodontist left, and so he then invited me, and I joined, because it was my church at that time. I taught there for 8 years and did my research in a field that Judd Hickey, who was at Ohio State, was doing comparable research at Ohio State. And we published in the same journals, and we then at national meetings got to know each other. And he was invited to be dean at the new dental school here, and he knew me, and he knew that I knew how to read a blueprint, and that I had worked closely with architects. So he says, "Would you be my second man?" And I said, "That'd be a delight." So I came to Augusta, and Dr. Arrear was president. He just died a few months ago. But he hated with a passion meetings. And they would have what they call White House meetings on health, and other meetings called by the governor. And he would say, "Tom, you go represent me." So I would go to some pretty high-ranking meetings, and I was never bashful. I'd ask questions or make comments. And I remember once the front row was filled with the CEOs of General Motors and General Electric and Ford, and I mean all the big companies. And here I'm telling them how health care should be delivered. But when Dr. Steinfeld became president, he wanted a new vice president for academic affairs, and I was recommended for the position. And so I moved into that spot.
And how long were you the vice president
8
of the school
years,
dentistry?
and then I retired.
Now, we skipped a very important part of your life,
What was that?
and that was when you met Betty.
Oh,
Would you like to tell us
you know,
about that?
my dad was building. He built mainly after the Depression. And having the responsibility of a large family, he never wanted to go out into competitive contracting. So he did contracted building on salary for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. You know, he was building a girls' dormitory for a Seventh-day Adventist boarding academy in central New York. And they used that grounds of that academy for camp meetings. So I came home between my sophomore and junior years to work for my dad. And on the church service for the camp meeting, they had what they called a youth tent. So I said, well, I guess I think I'll go to the youth service. So I get into the tent, and some of the other workers that were there had been recruited to help take up the offering. And so one of the guys said, hey, Tom, we need somebody else. And they gave me a Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket. And I was supposed to go up down the aisle. He said, before we take up the offering, we're going to have special music. So these two young girls come out and go behind me. And one of the girls, the shorter of the two, slightly shorter, was wearing glasses. And she had a regal look and a regal walk, and she was beautiful. So I said to this buddy that had gone to school there, I said, you know those two girls? He said, sure. I said, you know the one with glasses? He said, sure. I said, is she single? He said, yes. Does she have a boyfriend? He said, they broke up a month ago. I said, do you know her well enough to introduce us? He said, sure. He said, why? I said, I'm going to marry her. So we were introduced that afternoon, and one of the girls, there were a bunch of girls sitting on the lawn, and one of the girls piped up and said, you got a car? Of course, my dad did, and I said, sure. He said, we'd like to go and get a milkshake tonight. And I said, I'd be glad to take it. Well, the closest milkshake was 4 or 5 miles down the road at a place called Mills College, which is an exclusive girls' school. So after dinner, about sundown or so, I showed up with my dad's old Chevrolet, and there's only one girl out there, the girl with the glasses. And so she's kind of blushed. She said, all the other girls decided they had something else to do. Do you mind taking me? Mm-hmm. I said, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So I took her, we got a milkshake. And coming back, I reached over and took her hand. I've held a lot of hands in my life, but not one like that. We got down, and the academy was right on the shore of Lake Cayuga. So instead of going up the hill to the dormitory, I stopped down by the dock, and we walked out to the end of the dock to look at the moonlight and the waves, and we talked a bit. We walked back about 2/3 of the way back to the car, and I stopped and I kissed her. And I've never had a kiss like that in my life. And I had her for lunch. I had her at the house for lunch the next day. I think it was Sunday. And I got the thumbs up all around the table very quietly. This was the one. I met her at home 2 weeks later and asked her to marry me. I knew I had to ask her right away to get her to go to a college that would be near where I was at dental school. 9 days from now, we'll celebrate our 60th wedding anniversary.
That's a wonderful story, Dr. Zwemer. And she's a lovely lady. I had the
Isn't
opportunity
she?
to meet her.
She's fantastic. She made me the right kind of man too. I'll tell you that.
Well, Dr. Zwemer, you've been very willing to share your life and some of your experiences. Some of them are quite hilarious and some of them are very somber. As you reflect these last couple of minutes over your life and the things that are important to you, could you describe what your legacy is, what you would like it to be, what it is in your own mind, what you think you've left, and finally, how best do you want to be remembered?
I would say humility that is learned through education is the best. The people that I believe that are the most intelligent really are the most humble. That's why Arnold Zimmerman stands so high in my mind, and a few others like Harry O'Rear was a pediatrician and president of the college. The medical college would still be struggling along as a medical school if it wasn't for the vision of Harry O'Rear and men of that type. Men like my father. My father, one testimony from a fellow that saw my book or something, he wrote me a letter. He said, I want to give you a testimony about your father. He said, I went to Atlantic Union College to start school, and the first thing I did is got a job working for your dad. And I worked for your dad about 3 weeks before I made application for school. And so I made application and I had to have an interview with the president. And he said, I asked your dad to go with me. So he said he would. And the president looked at what my cash balance was. He said, I had $100 to my name and a job working for your dad at minimum wage. He said, the president looked me in the eye and said, son, you'll never make it. You don't have the kind of money it takes to get through this college. He said, your dad spoke up and said to the president, he'll make it. He's worked for 3 weeks with me, and I'm telling you, he's the kind of guy you want to have graduate from this school. Now you take him. He said, I graduated, and he said, I owe it to your dad. That is what I think makes life worth the living and worth the being. We have to take responsibility, but we have to know that we've earned it, and that responsibility is to take care of those that can't take care of themselves. And that's why I spent my life treating and teaching people. We had a black girl dental student that the faculty said will never make it. I said, let me tutor her before the national board test. There was part 1 and part 2 of the national board. She said she'll never pass part 1 of the national board. I said, give her to me, release her from classes for 2 weeks and let me tutor her. I tutored her for 2 weeks. She took the national board and came top in the nation. And she's now a dentist practicing in Atlanta. I think those are the kinds of things that life has taught me. And I wanted to give back as much of that as I know how to do.
Well, thank you, Dr. Zwemer. You certainly have earned our respect.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
certainly appreciate your service to our nation and our community.
Right, but it's been fun.
Well, Dr. Zwemer, on behalf of the Augusta-Richmond County Historical Society, I'd like to personally thank you for participating in the Veterans Historical Project. It has truly been my honor to share your experiences today.
It's been fun for me, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir.
There you go.
Yes, sir.
Tom, I'll tell you about someone else you may remember, Fairfield Goodale.
Oh, yes.
I'm going to be interviewing